What's going on, guys? It's Bromley. I wanted to talk a little bit about the video I put up yesterday. I did a full upper back workout from two friends of mine who are competitive bodybuilders and having been ingrained in that arena for a long time, because I've taken information from a lot of bodybuilders, physique athletes, and general bodybuilding culture for years, especially 20 years ago, when strength sports weren't as popular as they were now, and then muscle rags were kind of the only thing you had access to. So when it comes to the idea of how to get stronger, muscle growth is part of that. So I always saw it as self-evident as, if you want to learn as much as you can about how the human body works, how it grows, and you're interested in continuously gaining muscle mass over time, you should take lessons from the most developed people in the field and try to build a consensus. So for those of you who don't know, Russ is one of my best friends. He's been bodybuilding forever. Brittney Anthony, her father is actually Melvin Anthony. And for those of you who don't follow bodybuilding, 15 or so years ago, he was a regular on the Olympia stage. He's an IFBB pro. He's local here. So both Russ and Brittney have been ingrained in the arena for a very long time, and they've both been mentored by some of the best in the world. One of Tony's earlier mentors was Denise Gerard, who was an IFBB pro. So I'm seeing a lot of comments. You guys did not like that video at all. And I kind of understand why, because I've carved out a niche, and that was intentional. I mean, I tried to focus on a particular lean to build a thread of consistency, and that came in the form of breaking down programs and trying to get to the core of how training organization works to keep you growing and how you should be making decisions long term. And people see that as kind of a scientific approach. It's certainly empirical, but I'm going to clarify in a minute how I see science and how we can kind of reliably come to the best decisions given the information we have available. So I want to address a couple points, a couple things that people said, because I know some of the lingo and some of the ways that they have of thinking about these movements aren't what you're used to, and a lot of people disregard it as BroScience. So I want to clarify. So I don't interview Russ, I don't film Russ, I don't follow Russ because I expect him to give the Neil deGrasse Tyson breakdown of how things work and why. I follow him because he's accomplished in the field. And in any field, there's a component of what works that you have to get a grasp on before you can have a discussion about why it works. I often think of these types, and I know a lot of people that kind of fit this bill, where they might not be teaching a physiology class anytime soon, but they have so much experience in the field that I take them at their word when they tell me that something works. I think of it as like Mick from Rocky. It's like, on the one hand, you got Drago, who's being trained by the guys in lab coats, and they have them hooked up to sensors and they're collecting data left and right. And on the other hand, you got Mick, who's having Rocky chase a chicken. But the idea is, when you're that old grizzled bastard who's been in the field forever, you have a pretty good handle on what the best have done to get that way. And you instinctively know how to organize things because you've watched it work in a specific way over time. And that has value. So one of the things that I want to point out, he talks a lot about trapping blood. And that's one of the things that was getting pointed out, well, this is just bro science. So I want to clarify that and then talk about why I think it's valuable to what you guys are doing or should be doing. So the concept of trapping blood is actually not bro science. It may have originated that way, but it is actually very much backed in plenty of clinical studies. So if any of you have seen the blood occlusion, the CATU, the blood flow restriction video that I did a couple days ago, and I talk about how tying off your limb causes blood to pool in the muscle, and that artificially increases fatigue. Well, it's not just tension. It's not just the work you're doing with a weight that causes growth. There's a lot of triggers for growth. So by artificially increasing fatigue, you're not letting blood come out, which means you're pooling waste products. Muscle fibers can't contract when they're saturated with waste products. You have to be able to buffer them. So when you prevent that from happening, you get to that level of fatigue earlier, which means that those motor units can't be used because fatigue is too high. So your nervous system has to recruit satellite motor units. Now, we normally get to that point with a lot of weight or with very high fatigue just from the work we do. But if you are pooling blood in an area, if you're trapping blood in an area, and blood flow restriction is a perfect example of this, you prevent the ability of the body to function. It finds a workaround. And actually, one of the benefits of blood flow restriction was that it caused this effect without the need for as much teardown. So there was even a comment that you can trigger a growth response without the need to dig yourself out of the hole that you create from all of the teardowns. There's benefit to that. If any of you have actually caught a pump, or if any of you have actually figured out how to isolate individual muscles, you know what it feels like when a muscle gets absolutely engorged with blood. So this I see when he talks about moving blood or trapping blood. I don't see it fundamentally as any different than the mind-muscle connection, which has been a staple in bodybuilding for like 70 years. I mean, one of the first things I read, Arnold's Bodybuilding Encyclopedia was one of the first inspirations I had with just run-of-the-mill weight training. And they talk about the mind-muscle connection. If your goal is to target a muscle, you need to know how to remove the other muscles from the equation. And you can conceptualize how it feels when it gets pumped, what that trapping blood sensation feels like when it comes to targeting it. Now, a good example, if you're a power lifter, how many bench pressers have you heard talk about the importance of rear delts? If the only way you know how to move is with regards to motor patterns, which is what lifters do, Olympic lifters and power lifters, they're focused on movement patterns, getting better at a way of moving that brings in as many muscles as possible and tries to move in the most efficient way possible. So that's the skill that you get when you refine a clean and jerk or a squat or a deadlift or whatever. And that's how we spend most of our time moving. Now, if you've had trouble getting a weak area to grow, it might be that you are not targeting the right area, even though you've gotten better at that movement pattern, which means you need to try something different. Rear delts are a good example. You can focus on the movement pattern of a row all you want, but if you don't know how to conceptualize what it feels like when your rear delts get absolutely annihilated by switching the emphasis to them over, let's say, rhomboids, traps, lats, whatever else, then you're going to have a hard time getting those suckers to grow if you don't know how to get to that point. I had that trouble with my triceps. I focused on compound movements, on pressing my entire life. Overhead pressing, benching, even dips, stuff like that. My shoulders and pecs took over everything. Part of it's the way I'm built. I'm sure part of it was the way I went through the motion. I had to get very damn creative on how to get my triceps to fatigue so much that not only that they would grow because I stimulated them specifically enough to grow, but so that I felt them contribute to other movements. It wasn't until I started doing things like high rep band press downs or supersets with like skull crushers or bench dips going into like kickbacks. You take 10-pound dumbbells, you do a kickback, you feel them cramp up and pump up with blood. So there's the fatigue component, there's the mind muscle component, but then there's also the fact that when you drive blood into a muscle, you force blood out into those capillaries, okay, blood pools, and then you force something called cell swelling, which is how you get sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. Now, some of you nerds might be thinking, well, I don't want that. I want myofibrillar hypertrophy because that's where the density and the real strength comes from and blah, blah, blah. And in some sense, that's true, but it is a huge, huge misstep to think that your training is specific or focused enough, or that it can be, that you have the capacity to pick and choose exactly how you grow muscle. You are not benefiting yourself by trying to keep your training a certain way. You know, you probably heard like Konstantinov's was like, I don't do pump work. All of my accessory is very heavy. Okay, but that's not the norm for guys that rely on a lot of accessory work to get bigger. If you look at anything from Westside, if you look to some of the famous, power builders from the past, you look at guys like Doug Young or Bill Kazmaier, or any of the guys who have used a lot of different exercises to develop a physique that is well-rounded and strong and efficient, you're going to find a wide variety of isolation exercises, and you're typically going to find a lot of damn reps. Sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is also beneficial because as the cells swell, you get more bodies, you get more organelles within the cell, which contribute to things like capacity and endurance, which, yes, you need. You need a certain amount of mitochondrial bodies. You need these extra organelles that are going to help you train harder and longer so that you can handle the heavy workouts down the road. None of you have the ability to optimize myofibrillar hypertrophy over anything else. And by the way, sarcoplasmic hypertrophy doesn't happen by itself. It's not like you're only doing that. You still get myofibrillar hypertrophy from that high rep work, especially as you create fatigue that gets you to recruit more motor units, like we just established that it already does. So this has plenty of backing, not just in the limited clinical data that this field has, but hugely anecdotally. So I want to get into that as far as the how we conceptualize science and BroScience. And a lot of people that try to differentiate have never even taken a science lab class or written a paper or conducted an experiment where they had to control for their, write and talk about what their sources of error were, or things they might have gotten wrong. The thing is, we do hold science, the empirical method, let's call it, the way that we reliably come to the best conclusion. We hold ourselves accountable to sources of error, and that's hugely important. But we don't always, in fact, we often don't have the capacity to do an academically funded, double-blind study that had a bunch of resources and money thrown at it and a huge talent pool that we could follow for years. That doesn't exist in this field, and it's one of the reasons why the academic component of strength and conditioning and weight training and all that, anyone in the field will tell you, 20 to 30 years behind what goes on in the gym on a daily basis. It really is. And that's simply because we don't have the capacity to run studies like this. So it is not in your best interest. It is not intellectual whatsoever to say, well, because we can't do that, we can't know anything. And that all of the other ways that we have of gaining knowledge aren't valid. It's like, we're not going to send somebody to the moon based off anecdotal evidence, but if it's something that comes at very minimal risk or cost to you to implement, and if it's something that you can see a consensus where it's been done a certain way among the best performers and gotten a good result, yeah, we absolutely can apply that. You know, if you're in a tribe that engaged in agriculture, 1,000 years ago, and your crops weren't growing, but the neighbor tribe was, and you talk to them, and they're like, oh, well, we talked to some of the other tribes, they were doing this and that, and then it just worked like a charm. You're gonna fucking apply that. And if it gets you a better result, that's now a tool in your belt, and you're going to keep doing it that way. Believe it or not, that's empiricism. It's trying things, gauging the result, moving forward from there. So this kind of general rejection of things that aren't sciencey enough, it comes off as kind of pretentious, and it's not really based in reality. I mean, this is how civilization has been growing since we've been around. I mean, the best technologies that we got early on didn't come out of university. They came out of trial and error on an individual basis and collecting that data. So that's an important thing to know. I absolutely value bodybuilding information because it's one of the oldest applications, consistent applications of strength training. For any of you that say, well, clearly he's on gear and he's training like an idiot, everybody's on gear. And that's not a debate. I'm not asking anybody's opinion on that. I'm informing you. So many decades back, there used to be rumors that so-and-so is taking drugs. Today, 2021, there are rumors that somebody's natty. Guys get together and they're like, dude, that guy, he won that contest last week. Dude, I heard he's not taking anything. It is so cheap. It is so easy to get. There's literally no incentive for anybody not to take it. I'm not advocating you take it. I think that's a whole different conversation. I think too many idiots jump in way too quick. But if we're being honest and evaluating all of our heroes and the best performers, they are all on gear. So if you're going to look at somebody who has built a physique or has built a strong lift, especially as you're trying to get a consensus of a lot of people that fit that bill, you can't just disregard somebody who does well and say, well, he's on gear, that must explain it. It's like, what are you going to do? You're only going to take advice from people that don't have impressive physiques? You're going to take advice from the mediocre performers because you're sure they're natty? Like, that's kind of a silly way to go about it. So all things being equal, everybody's on gear. We can still isolate tactics that have been used for decades with good results, and we can apply it and capitalize on it, because if we wait until we get the academic study that fits our very high standards, you're going to be dead before you have enough information to apply the things you need to do to increase strength and size consistently. The thing about YouTube that I want you guys to understand, and actually this is the culture in general with whatever media you're looking through, is everything is consumer driven. Think about if you went to a university and you were trying to become an expert in something, and you realized that on day one, all of the new students got together and selected what the curriculum was going to be. How ridiculous would that be? Would you have faith that that system is going to get you the best result? Probably not. That is exactly what goes on in across the entire fitness industry, but specifically with YouTube, because things get voted to the top based on whether or not people like it. So it is consumer driven, and you get a lot of people who are coming in as white belts, and because we don't have the actual hierarchy that academics does, that fields like, martial arts is a good example, where the sensei is the guy that's been around the block, that's who you're listening to, and you're going to be 10 times better off listening to him than trying to figure it out on your own. It's the same dynamic, and there's a lot of people that think that they deserve to have an opinion because they're used to being in a position to select for what they think is the best information, and it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So long story short, I understand the stuff you guys have come to expect from me, and I'm going to keep putting that out, but I'm never going to share something I don't think has value to you guys And if there's questions or comments about how or why I put stock in it, I'll always talk about it. But I'm not going to cater, I'm not going to go so far out of my way to reinforce the niche I've built by only kind of catering to the lifting snobs that seem to think that really strict technique is the way to do it because they learned that somewhere in their 2 days of training, or that bodybuilding BroScience is bullshit and it doesn't mean anything. I mean, that type of snobbery doesn't help you out. All of this stuff has a rich culture of overlap because it all does overlap. You're talking about weight training. How many different ways can you weight train? You're always going to get stronger and you're always going to grow muscle, and we should be able to borrow freely from different schools of thought that work. So God, the technique was another one. There were people that every time you post somebody doing back work, there's people that get indignant because body English was used. Oh my God, as if there exists a physique or a back that is supremely developed that only used strict reps. Like, that's not a thing. I don't know where that idea propagates from. It's so strange to me that people fixate on that. Every example we have of the biggest, thickest, most monstrous backs in the world, which are required to be the strongest pressers, squatters, or deadlifters in the world, come from people who use some type of body English in their row. There's a trade-off, but the trade-off means more load gets moved, more stabilization has to occur. It's I'm not going to say it's better, but it's such a useful way of doing things that we see it everywhere. Every bodybuilder you can think of uses body English. How many powerlifters have you seen do croc rows? Or something like with a cheat, like a power row? I remember seeing Kaylor Woolham. I want to say like Chris Duffin. I've seen a lot of these guys, use 500 plus pounds and use a lot of heave to move. And the thing is, when you subject your upper back to that kind of dynamic, overloaded movement, it grows. So I'm not concerned with really catering to anybody's preconceived notions about what lifting should look like. I'm interested in collecting a consensus of what has worked. Anyway, so I shared that video because it's important for you guys to know this is how many people grow physiques. If I had to bet money, I would say that the average solo lifter 2 years in, if you were to compare a solo brand new power lifter to a solo brand new physique hopeful or bodybuilding hopeful, in my experience, the guys that have hit the ground running with bodybuilding type movements get stronger faster because there's fewer pitfalls. Effort is a deciding factor. There's not as many pitfalls with programming that you can fall into. And newbies grow like a weed anyways. So this stuff is very valuable for growth. And you're going to see these principles. If you look for them, you're going to see those dots connected across powerlifters, strongmen, even Olympic lifters have taken to, like the Chinese system, I understand is pretty well known for incorporating a ton of bodybuilding accessory work to try and round out their physiques because they recognized they had smaller frames than a lot of their competitors and they had to fill out their frames, and it worked very well for them because even though they have smaller frames, they have more mass, which means that they can perform better. So all of this stuff will help you. So that's all I got for today. Go ahead and leave questions and comments. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of them. Yeah, it was hard to see that many dislikes, but I think there's a conversation that has to happen here so you guys can understand where I'm coming from. And I just want to let you guys know that while providing content that you guys like and want to see is important to me, and I'm going to keep holding up high standards for myself, I'm also not going to go out of my way to cater to the customer is always right mentality, where I just orient the things I put out to what I think people are going to respond to, because I wouldn't have a lot of integrity or be very trustworthy if that was the case. So questions and comments, leave them. I'll get back to them. Also, Patreon, I got some new videos up on my Patreon. I got my own training up there. I'm going to be putting more of my own training up there. So go ahead and check that out as well. So thanks for watching, guys. Till next time, this is Bromley from Empire Barbell. I'll see you.